So folks asked a few questions, one of which is something I kind of neglected to answer, was how often we publish. And twice annually, so on January 15th typically and July 15th typically, which the fact that the issue is called TriQuarterly and it's published twice a year is a result of it being initially published by grad students, where Northwestern operates on a quarter system rather than semesters, and it published 3 of those quarters, hence TriQuarterly. And as far as open submissions, we're open typically from October 1st to December 31st, and then again March 1st to May 31st, I believe. So.
Thanks, that's great. Thank you guys for for sticking around. Thanks for doing the Q&A there. So do you have generally a theme issue? Is there a theme issue now, and do you plan for the next open call to be a theme issue?
No. So yeah, so right now there's been this theme that's kind of come into our lap, and it's a lot of like diagramming. But I mean, that's something I might like address in the editor letter, or I might not. But again, that's something where it just kind of like happened rather than actively seeking it. There are some theme issues I'd like to do in the future, just depending on like what the editorial staff is interested in.
Mm-hmm. And I remembered, sorry, what I was saying when I cut myself off, it was just that writers should not stress out about the cover letter, even if you you know, have the wrong editors' names in there and you do all the things you're not supposed to do. I think most, unless you do something really egregious, editors are going to read your work anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I get a lot of like, Dear John, Bohnsack versus Josh. And I won't hold it against anyone.
Yeah.
Even like occasionally we'll get ones that are like, Dear Editors of Crazy Horse. You know, you might be like sending this out a lot of different places, but like, I'm gonna look at your work. Regardless, like we're gonna have at least 2, more likely 3 or 4 people like having eyes on your work for every single submission.
And because you mentioned Crazy Horse, actually, I'm wondering if there are other magazines that you feel a kinship with in terms of the aesthetic and what you're trying to do.
So while we were on the break, or in between, like Bernadette asked about Ulysses, and we kind of talked about the Little Review for a little bit, which was, you know, kind of a historical magazine that first published Ulysses in these segments and episodic pieces. And I like to think about that of like the Chicago ethos of like the Little Review that was started in Chicago. Things like The Dial, which was kind of a more progressive literary magazine, even poetry to an extent. So I like to have those in mind, like when thinking about like what we're accepting. And of course, there are a lot of contemporary magazines that kinship would be ideal, but more likely I'm just a fan of that. I really want to kind of have that ethos, where I love The Stinging Fly, which is based out of Dublin, and The White Review, which is based out of England. And then there are things like Ninth Letter, which is like one of my favorite literary magazines. And just in the fact that they collaborate with their design team at the University of Illinois, their design program is just amazing. I'd like to see more of that collaboration among literary magazines.
And we were also talking about your own submissions process. And I'm starting to ask editors this because I think it's helpful for writers to know, like, have you found it easier submitting your work because you're an editor? Is there like a secret pathway? Or are you sort of more, you know, like you're in the trenches with us and you're getting rejections and all that too?
I'm getting a lot of rejections. Yeah. Like I'm pretty meticulous about keeping a spreadsheet of
Mhm.
my submissions. I think last I checked, like, I break it up into like where I submitted, what I submitted, what date, if there was a fee, and
Mhm.
like the status. Because like the worst thing I want to do is send one magazine the same thing twice.
Mhm.
No matter how revised it is, even like I personally don't think like they would be willing, if it wasn't working the first time for them, it's probably not going to work the second, even if it is highly different. But with that, I think I have had like 200 submissions or pitches go out in this last year.
Wow.
And of that, like I've had I think a pretty lucky year as far as submissions. I've
Mhm.
had like 15 things published or so, but that's still a pretty small percentage.
Mhm. 200 submissions in a year.
Yeah, and
That's amazing.
I do want to clarify that with that, like I am very careful about what I send to where. Like I really love just literary magazines in general. I used to kind of live in like Entropy's where to submit forums of just like finding new publications that are opening or starting.
Mhm.
Um, I really hope someone takes ownership of that and can continue that trajectory now that Entropy is closing.
Mhm.
But I really want the pieces that I'm sending to places to have that aesthetic that they typically go for, and I hope people are doing the same thing for TriQuarterly.
Mhm. So take us into your process a little bit. How do you find magazines to submit to, and how do
Mm,
you determine if they're the right magazine for your work?
yeah. So the easiest thing is reading submission guidelines as far as
Mhm.
finding what folks are interested in. I've been kind of living in this literary magazine world for a little while. So now I kind of have a feel for like if someone wants a more straightforward realist story, then I'm probably going to send it to someone like Kenyon Review, maybe.
Mm.
Uh, versus like I'm not going to send a realist story to Diagram because
Mhm.
that's just not what they do. If I have something that's like maybe like I have a kind of a strange piece that's coming out with Barrel House sometime in the near future, which is like a transcript for like a clip show of a sitcom that doesn't exist,
Hmm.
or it's something that like I pitched a few other places, but I'm like there are very few some places that would accept something that is like bizarre and out of nowhere, that has kind of that humor aspect to it.
Mhm.
So I was very
Mhm.
happy that like they were into that.
That's exactly how I think of sort of Barrel House, Monkey Bicycle, and Hobart. Like those three are sort
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
sister brother magazines.
Yeah, there's
So how do you find, do you just already know the magazines you want to submit to, or do you go, is there a list that you consult? Do you go on Duotrope?
yeah. I typically use Entropy's like where to submit just as far as like finding places.
Mhm.
Uh, I found like Twitter has always been
Hmm.
a gift and a curse in that way. Um, and I'm looking forward to going to AWP again this year and having that kind of more hands-on approach of like I found a lot of great places the last few years I've been that I just didn't know about, but are doing like really cool things, and
Mhm.
so that has been a good resource for me.
So just sort of talking to people and putting your feelers out.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And with a few friends too, like I'm pretty good about like sharing like, oh, this place that I saw is open, like maybe you should send this piece to them if
Mhm.
I between my friends, and they do the same for me, hopefully too.
Mhm. So does being a writer who is receiving rejections have an effect on how you deliver rejections?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I try to be kind about it, and like
Mhm.
I've received some like very like enigmatic rejections
Mm.
that almost makes me more angry than just like a form rejection.
Mhm.
Um, while I was teaching my OEA class a few years ago, I had a student who was like kind of crafting. He's like, I like this piece, like it was totally fine. And I'm like, it's great, like send him a rejection, but like if he's just like, it's not something I'm really like in love with.
Mm.
And was like, great, let's do it. And so like in the back end of Submittable, he like sent the rejection, and he like had this realization where he's like, oh, that wasn't like terrible. Like, I don't hate this guy. I just always assumed that people hated me when they rejected my stuff. And I don't feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it right. That's a really good thing for writers to keep in mind, right? That it's not personal, it's not rejection of you as an entity.
Yeah,
So do you have a policy, like some people when they get a rejection they send out 10 more submissions immediately? Do you do anything like that?
the first thing I do is like almost too ecstatically is log it into my submission spreadsheet. There's also forms that I'm maybe a little too into, which is like a rejection wiki where you can look at specific tiers of rejection, see if like maybe it is personal. So sometimes I'll do that, and the way I kind of like to judge that is if there is a piece that's getting a lot of rejections, but maybe a lot of tiered rejections, then it's probably not something I'm doing, more as like it's just not fitting.
Right.
If I'm getting a lot of form rejection on it, then like I need to go back and like rework this, or like get some more eyes on it, if like people can give me feedback because something's not working with this.
Interesting. So if you actually will, because people ask this a lot, like when do you actually take a piece and go back and work on it? So it sounds like when you get a lot of form rejection letters, you will look at the piece again and start to tinker with it. But if the rejections are more like, this doesn't work for us, but we want to see more of your work in the future, you'll leave it alone and just keep sending it out.
Yeah. And a lot of times too, like sometimes I'll get those where I'm like excited about like, they're like, yeah, like send us more work. And I'm like, what a great, compliment is like that they're willing to read more, and inviting me to. And my impulse is to like, oh, well, I could send this to you, but I hold back from that because I know if that happens to me, like as an editor, I'm like, this is great, like send us more work. And then they're like instantly like, well, this one, and I'm like, maybe you're not thinking about it as much of like what it is apt for like what we're looking for. And you're just kind of sending what you think is like your second best thing.
Yeah,
so I
I
like
think
to go back and like really reflect.
Yeah, and talking to writers, and I relate to this too, is like you feel like you have like a limited window, like an editor has dared to speak to you and you only have that short time to get back to them and send them, or else they'll completely forget you forever. So I always tell writers, like, no, that's not the case. They'd rather see good work, strong work 7 months from now than something immediately that doesn't fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if they're sending you like a more personalized letter, then like they're taking the effort, and like they're probably going to remember that. Much in the same sense that if someone sends me like a very nasty email after rejection, then I'm going to remember that too.
Right. Does that happen?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like too frequently, but like when it does, it's I think that's more infuriating than like anything. Is getting those back where people are like, well, like you rejected this after one day, and it's like, sorry, we thought we were doing your courtesy of like reading this fast and getting it back to you. But like if that's the way you took it, then that's on you.
Yeah, it's sort of like you can't win. Like if you reject too quickly, they're gonna resent you, and if you take too long, they'll be annoyed with you. So it sounds like you have a lot going on with your own writing and teaching and 2 lit mags and a press. And I always ask this to editors, which is, how do you stay in the game? How do you avoid burnout? What makes you excited to do the work of editing this journal?
Yeah, Becky, I'm so tired.
Are you?
Yeah, well, I think the way that like I kind of operate, like I am in a lot of these realms. So it's very easy to get like maybe I am burnt out on TriQuarterly a little bit, but I'm like, well, I can work on like long day press stuff, and it's like a whole different like aspect of my brain, like versus like maybe the more paperwork kind of like instructional stuff of TriQuarterly. I can like start designing like book layouts for long day press, or move on and use that different part of my brain. But also like working on my own writing, I think kind of feeds into that, where I'll just kind of like feel like, oh, I need to do something, and either be like dedicating that like feeling to someone else's work, or I can use it for myself. Like it's just a matter of like timing and what I feel more compelled to do.
Do you feel like you're spread too thin?
Yes, but I think if I wasn't, I wouldn't know what to do with myself.
Okay. It's sort of it feeds all the work.
Yeah, realistically, I know how the atmosphere of like making a living through literature is, and
Mhm.
it's hard to do. So like
Yeah.
if I have like these 3-4 jobs, that's a way to like kind of like put together a career,
Mhm.
more than might be feasible. Maybe something that was possible 30 plus years ago, but like is not so much now.
Yeah, it sounds like too, I mean, I was talking to another editor about this, just the academic grind. I mean, it's so much more grueling than, it used to be sort of, I hate to be like in the good old days, but there was just so much more stability in academia maybe 40 years ago. And now just, you're piecing together a lot of different things and it is, it sounds exhausting.
It's exhausting, but again, like if I wasn't doing them, I would. I don't know. I
Yeah.
really am excited to do them.
Mhm.
So it's exhausting, but I also get energy from it.
Okay, that's good. I didn't know if you were like, I'm at the end of my rope here. Yeah, but it's I can see that like it all sort of feeds what you're trying to explore and cultivate professionally and aesthetically and
Definitely.
all
And
that.
with these things, I'm not doing them all in a vacuum either. Like
Mhm.
I have a really great team at TriQuarterly and like a really great team at Long Day Press. And I like get a lot out of like teaching my students with OYA.
Mhm.
Um, so like the fact that like maybe someone relies on me a little bit, or like I can like work with other people, um, it makes me excited to like work with people on those projects.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a moment, I've talked to some editors where they realize when they're not reading work with the same joy, then that's when they need to step back. Like when you're just reading submissions and it's drudgery, because at that point you're not doing a service to the writers anymore, right? If you're just
Definitely.
like dreading the work. But if you're excited about it and there's a sense of community that's sort of bolstering you, then, I think that's the way it needs to be.
Definitely. And it's not that I don't have those feelings. I think like
Mhm.
every other week there's something where I'm like, oh, I'm done to like I'm done writing, or I'm done editing this project, or I'm done doing this one. Um,
Mhm.
but then I guess I quickly get over that and I'm like, well, I'll step up
Yeah.
my game and work on this project, and like it's rejuvenating in a sense.
I get it. Yeah, no, I did. I don't know if you knew the review back when I was doing that, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest surprise and frustration about these side projects is that there ends up being so much back end work. Like I never got into a literary project in order to hyperlink names or edit code or like all these not it wasn't that much code because I don't really know code, but like there were just so many administrative tasks and web tasks and things that were not exciting. And I think at a certain point those kind of dominated the more creative work that I was really interested in. So that's always like when you're as editors and writers, there's this tug of war where you're trying to figure out like how much of this is actually creative and giving me energy and putting great energy into the world, and how much is just like mindless
Absolutely.
mindless tasks that nobody, we don't want to do any more of than we have to.
And how much of that can I justify to like not devoting to my own writing? Like, am I taking
Yeah,
stuff away?
right,
And
exactly.
realistically, I know that like they work together.
Yeah.
Like if I can like take a step back, like it's easy to be selfish and be like, I need this time for myself to write. And like hopefully I
Mhm.
give myself that time.
Right.
But really like if I dedicate this time to like, doing some of that kind of more like input work,
Hmm.
like it will make me appreciate or like look at different ways of like thinking about my own writing. I think it all
Yeah.
feeds into itself.
Yeah, we all have to do some of that sort of logistical work, but
Mhm.
hopefully not too much of it. So anyway, speaking of time, I won't take any more of your time, Joshua, but thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Everybody should check out TriQuarterly. It's triquarterly.org. Is that?
That'll work.
Yeah, okay. And you guys are on Twitter at TriQuarterly,
Patrick Orley
um,
Mag.
at
Mhm.
TriQuarterly Mag. All right, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a really great discussion. It was great talking with all of you.
Yeah, thanks for coming out, guys. See you soon.